Every morning, the man running the most used AI product in human history does something that almost nobody else at his level does. He doesn't open a task list. He doesn't review a quarterly objective. He doesn't set a goal. He asks a question. And that single distinction, question instead of goal, may explain more about how Sam Altman thinks, builds, and leads than almost anything else you've heard about him. Sam Altman leads OpenAI. As of March 2026, that company is valued at $852 billion, generates $2 billion in monthly revenue, and serves 900 million weekly active users through ChatGPT, the fastest growing consumer application in the history of the internet. That product crossed 1 billion monthly active users in June 2026, 1 billion. And the man at the centre of it traces his operating philosophy not to goal-setting frameworks or productivity systems, but to a single question asked by a mathematician at Bell Labs decades before the internet existed. This is the story of that question, what it does to a brain, and why the most powerful people in the world are quietly switching from answers to questions. Sam Altman was born on April 22nd, 1985 in Chicago. He grew up in Clayton, Missouri, and at age 8, his parents gave him an Apple Macintosh. He didn't just play with it. He took it apart. He taught himself to code. He reassembled it. That instinct, pull something open, find out how it works, ask why it does what it does, would become the defining through line of his entire life. He enrolled at Stanford in 2003 to study computer science, but left after 2 years. He later said he learned more playing poker with classmates than attending lectures. Think about what that means. The classroom gave him information. The poker table gave him questions about probability, about other people, about when to push and when to fold. He was already operating in question mode. He was 19 years old. He co-founded Looped, a location sharing app, which became part of a Y Combinator's inaugural class. It was acquired in 2012 for $43.4 million. Not a bad exit for someone who never finished his degree, but the acquisition wasn't what defined him. What defined him was what he did after, and more specifically, how he thought between things. In 2014, he became president of Y Combinator, succeeding its founder Paul Graham. He spent 5 years meeting thousands of founders, watching who succeeded and who didn't, building what he would later call problem taste. And in January 2019, he published something on his personal blog that over 200,000 people read in the days after it went live. He called it How to Be Successful, and buried inside it was a clue to everything. He wrote, "It is much more important to work on the right thing than it is to work many hours." That sentence sounds simple. It isn't, because identifying the right thing requires a completely different cognitive mode than executing on a predetermined goal. Goals tell you where to go. Questions ask whether you should be going there at all. And Altman had a specific question in mind, one he borrowed from a man named Richard Hamming. Hamming was a mathematician at Bell Labs in the mid-20th century. He had a habit that annoyed his colleagues profoundly. He would walk up to them, researchers, physicists, engineers, and ask, what are the most important problems in your field, and why aren't you working on them? Most people found this irritating. Hamming meant it sincerely. He believed that if you couldn't answer that question, you were probably wasting your time, no matter how hard you were working. Altman encountered this idea and didn't let it go. In his blog post, Researchers and Founders, he wrote that the best people in both groups spend a lot of time reflecting on some version of the Hamming question. Not occasionally, not quarterly, regularly, as an orienting device. The question functions less like a planning tool and more like a compass recalibration, making sure you're pointed at what actually matters before you start moving fast. But here's where the story gets genuinely strange, because it turns out this isn't just philosophy. There is hard neuroscience underneath it, and it changes the picture entirely. In October 2014, 3 researchers at UC Davis, Matthias Gruber, Bernard Gelman, and Charan Ranganath, published a study in the journal Neuron that would go on to receive 189 citations. They used fMRI to watch what happens inside a brain when it enters a state of curiosity. What they found was not subtle. Curiosity activates the midbrain, the nucleus accumbens, and the hippocampus, the same dopamine reward circuit that fires in response to food, money, and sex. Not metaphorically similar, literally the same circuit. And then it gets more interesting. Memory didn't just improve for the topics the subjects were curious about. It improved for completely unrelated information encountered during the curious state. The brain, once lit up by a genuine question, becomes more absorbent across the board. Ranganath put it plainly. Curiosity recruits the reward system, and interactions between the reward system and the hippocampus seem to put the brain in a state in which you are more likely to learn and retain information. This is not a motivational metaphor. This is mechanism. When you ask yourself a question you genuinely don't know the answer to, your brain chemically upgrades itself for learning. And when you set a fixed goal, a specific, deliverable, a predetermined outcome, you get a different kind of activation. You get execution mode, which is useful, but it's a different thing entirely. The theoretical backbone for why this works comes from a psychologist at Carnegie Mellon named George Lowenstein. In 1994, he published what became known as information gap theory. His definition of curiosity is worth sitting with. A cognitively induced deprivation that arises from the perception of a gap in knowledge and understanding. Not excitement, not enthusiasm, deprivation. Lowenstein argued that curiosity functions like hunger. It's a drive state. You notice a gap between what you know and what you want to know, and the gap creates genuine discomfort that compels you to close it. That compulsion is intrinsic. It doesn't require external accountability or a deadline or a reward. The question itself is the motivation. Now consider what Sam Altman is doing when he orients his thinking around the Hamming question. He is not motivating himself with a destination. He is creating a gap. He is deliberately installing a productive discomfort that his brain will then work to resolve. He's using curiosity as fuel rather than reward as fuel. And the evidence suggests that these two fuels produce fundamentally different kinds of work. This is worth pausing on, because goal setting has a serious research record too. Edwin Locke and Gary Latham built careers demonstrating that clear, specific, challenging goals improve performance. A 2006 meta-analysis of 94 independent studies found that implementation intentions, the if-then planning structures built around goals, produced effect sizes of 65, which is medium to large. Goals work. Nobody serious is arguing otherwise. The more precise claim is this: goals tell you how to execute on a direction you've already chosen. Questions help you choose the direction. Altman's contribution, whether or not he frames it this way, is the argument that direction selection is the leverage point, and that curiosity is the tool for it. As he said on Adam Grant's Rethinking podcast on January 7th, 2025, figuring out what questions to ask, it will be more important than figuring out the answer. Grant himself noted something adjacent. We used to put a premium on how much knowledge you had collected in your brain. Now I think it's much more valuable to be a connector of dots. Knowledge hoarding is the old game. Question asking is the new one. And there's a reason this conversation was happening in January 2025, because the technology that Altman has spent his career building is about to make the old game obsolete entirely. Here's the context that makes Altman's framework more than personal philosophy. He said it directly on that podcast. You and I are living through this once in human history transition, where humans go from being the smartest thing on planet Earth to not the smartest thing on planet Earth. If AI systems can answer most questions faster and more completely than any human, then the competitive advantage for humans shifts entirely to asking better questions. The person who knows how to orient a question, what to ask, why it matters, what field it belongs to, whether anyone is working on it, becomes vastly more valuable than the person who merely knows how to answer it. Altman has been living this principle. He's also building the machine that makes it the only viable strategy. And there's a texture to his life that makes this feel less abstract. He tracks his sleep with a dedicated device. He sleeps in a cold, dark, quiet room. He uses an LED light for 10 to 15 minutes each morning while reading email. He drinks about 200 milligrams of caffeine daily through espresso. He uses paper lists, not apps, to track his yearly, monthly, and daily priorities. The man building the world's most powerful AI company writes his most important goals by hand. He invested approximately $180 million of his own money in Retro Biosciences, a company trying to add 10 healthy years to the human lifespan. He isn't just asking questions about artificial intelligence. He's asking questions about the biological timeline he's operating within. And then there is November 2023. On November 17th, OpenAI's board fired him. The statement said he was not consistently candid with the board. He had not disclosed ChatGPT's launch in advance. He had not told them about his ownership of OpenAI's startup fund. Former board member Helen Toner would later allege that 2 executives had reported psychological abuse. That same night, Altman posted on X, "I loved my time at OpenAI. It was transformative for me personally, and hopefully the world a little bit." 5 days later, more than 700 of OpenAI's employees signed an open letter demanding the board resign and Altman return, threatening to walk out to Microsoft if they didn't. On November 21st, just after 10 p.m, OpenAI announced the deal in principle. By November 29th, he was officially back. What happened in those 5 days is its own documentary, but what's relevant here is what he returned to. He came back to a company defined by an unanswered question. Can artificial general intelligence be built in a way that benefits humanity? That question, not a roadmap, not a revenue target, not a product spec, is the organizing principle of the enterprise. The Hamming question applied at civilizational scale. The most important problem in the field. Are we working on it? As of July 2026, the company is preparing to go public, having confidentially filed with the SEC on June 8th, targeting a valuation approaching $1 trillion. It was founded as a non-profit in December 2015 with $1 billion in initial funding and a mission explicitly unconstrained by the need to generate financial return. That mission is now filtering through a structure valued at $852 billion. And the tension between those two things is a question Altman has not yet fully answered, which may be, in the deepest sense, exactly how he would want it. There's a cognitive science footnote that brings this full circle. A 2007 study found that preschool-aged children ask an average of 76 information-seeking questions per hour. 76 per hour. By the time those children complete formal schooling, that rate drops dramatically. The system teaches them to receive answers, not generate questions. Sam Altman dropped out of Stanford at 19 and never fully re-entered that system. The man who builds tools that answer questions for 1 billion people a week is himself running on a framework designed to generate questions. That is either a profound alignment or the most interesting irony in technology right now. The morning question isn't a ritual you'll find transcribed anywhere in Altman's writing. It's a distillation of the Hamming question, of the curiosity research, of a philosophy he has articulated in fragments across 15 years of blog posts and interviews. The specific form of it is less important than the structure. Wake up. Before you optimize execution, select direction. Before you measure progress, verify you're moving towards something worth reaching. Ask yourself, as Hamming asked his colleagues in the hallways of Bell Labs, what are the most important problems in this field, and am I actually working on them? Goals are answers you give yourself before you start. Questions are an admission that the most important work is still figuring out where to point. For Sam Altman, that admission has been worth $852 billion and counting. The question is whether you can make it worth something to you.